Hey, welcome to the Dale Wiley Show. Tonight, I'm lucky enough to speak with one of my favorite entertainers and one of the top entertainers in the Americana, roots, rock, alt country, whatever terms he will hate to hear, my good friend Brian Henneman from the Bottle Rockets. When I wanted to talk a little bit about you growing up, kind of the musical influences. You talked a little bit about that when you had the interview with PBS. What were kind of your first introductions into music?
I'm trying to think of what the very earliest would be. I'm going way back now. So I'm trying to think. I'm a little kid, and something made me excited about music. What would it have been? Well, I guess probably. We had a record player in the house. And we didn't play a lot of records in the house, but my mom had the Glenn Campbell Wichita Lineman record. And so that would have been like the very earliest starts of it. Then there was like,
did your parents listen to music? What did they like?
Just really just the kitchen table radio, which was pretty much tuned to KJCS, the local radio station that played nothing but country music. And so, I was a little kid and didn't really understand that. My parents were listening to it or whatever. So I was more interested in the Glenn Campbell record than what was coming off the radio in the kitchen. Somehow, I don't know why, but again, probably because I was just playing with the record player successfully. And then the Beatles, I like that. And then that would have taken me up to probably, what year did the one that really made me want to just do something with music was Badfinger. No matter what you want, I will. When that came out, I thought that was the Beatles. I'm a little kid, and so I hear anything that sounded good to me, I thought was the Beatles. So anyway, that song made me go crazy. I actually built myself a little fake guitar with a wrapping paper tube, and by this time, we're getting on to where I could. There were like cassette players coming in around that time, and so I somehow managed to record that on a cassette player off the radio, and they weren't like built into the radio yet. You had a cassette player. And then your cassette recorder, and then you had the radio, and I would sit up and wait for it to come on. So that was like the real serious, like, whoa, From hearing that on the radio, I took over the radio. I was getting old enough. I was probably about 10 at this time. Uh-huh. So that would have put 70, 71. That's probably about what time that song came out. I'm thinking somewhere right around there. Yeah. So then. I took over the radio. It was my radio now, and I would put it on. What was the station back then that I was listening to? It might have still been KXOK. It was like coming out of St. Louis. And anyway, it was like a pop music station. And I started listening to that, and that's whenever I started liking all kinds of new stuff. Like I first heard Carole King on there, and I was like, I loved her. She was like my first radio love. So I'm, like a little kid and just discovering all sorts of things at that time. And it wasn't long after that I started to buy my first records. I'm going out to the grocery store where you used to buy them in those days. And, back then, albums were $3.98. I would get my mom to buy me a record when we would go to the store. Actually, you know what? Now that I think of that, I did have a record before that. And that I was littler than that. The first record I ever got was at the grocery store. See, it's so long ago. I'm getting the timing all screwed up. So this was probably right after the Wichita Lineman phase that we went to the grocery store. And the first record I ever got was I just picked it for the album cover and the title of it. I got Paul Revere and the Raiders, Something Happening.
Oh, wow.
So, I didn't know what I was doing. I was a little kid. I was probably 8 years old then, 7 years old, even younger than that.
Yeah.
But that was 1968, that album. So I got that and listened to, I remember I was having a hard time at the record stand between that and Gary Puckett.
You chose correctly.
I think I did. I was a lucky choice. So actually, that was my first record. It's the only record I had as a little kid. I had that, and then Mom's record, and then my sister left me the 2 Beatles records, and that was it. But anyway, now that that's out of the way, then I started buying albums, later. Well, I'm probably 11 or 12 now. So we would have been into the 70s, early 70s by now. And I remember the very first, when I was like, becoming like a little music fan and wanting to play guitar and all that good stuff. So the first one I got was Led Zeppelin 2, which was a brand new album then. And I just, for some reason, I'm a kid. I'm just picking up. I don't know this stuff. I'm in Crystal City, Missouri. I didn't hear that stuff. We didn't really have a radio that would pick up FM very good down there. So I'm just hearing AM radio. And so I bought that album, and I brought it home, and I hated it. I was like, I'm a kid. I was like, I don't want to hear you don't want to hear Led Zeppelin when you're 11 years old or whatever I was at that time. Exactly. It's like, that's not for you. So I was like really, really burned by my first album buying experience, and I thought, well, I better choose wisely next time I get another one. And so the next time we went to the store, I'm still kind of like looking through and seeing what, looks like I might like it. Black Sabbath, Paranoid. But I loved that one. That one I would play like over and over and over. So, and that record, if I think about it now, that is way better for a kid. It's like a little kid is going to find like some kind of like, spooky movie science fiction kind of thing in there. Like I had no idea what Sweet Leaf was about, but it sounded cool. The singer sounded cool. It was like, Led Zeppelin was like blues influence and stuff. I was not ready for that at that time.
Right.
And so, So
when you started to get a little older, you've got things like Leonard Skinner, and you've also got Waylon Jennings and those sorts of things too. I mean, you definitely moved pretty fluidly across that line. Would you say that's right?
Yeah. Well, what it was, I was pretty exclusively. Well, you know what? It was when I was young, I didn't know what I was doing. I was buying records because I liked the covers, or I had heard of the name somehow, or whatever. The first record I ever bought, fully knowing what I was going to buy, was Leonard Skinner's Second Helping. I wanted to have those songs for my own, and I set out to go get those songs. So that was my first like informed purchase, was that one. And I stuck with Skinner, and then through friends. By this time you're in school, and you got the peer pressure, and you're getting influenced by your friends at school that know stuff you don't know. And I got into, like ZZ Top that way. I didn't really understand them, so I got into, and stuff like that was all going on. And, Rush, I got into Rush when I was, like, getting closer to, like 14 or, stuff that a young teen would, like, really be digging on.
Right.
And then it was pretty much, but what was happening now, as I was ramping that stuff up, I wasn't really listening to any country at that point. It was, other than peripherally on the radio station in the kitchen if my dad would have it on. Hee-haw when I was a kid. So it was more of a TV show thing than it was like a musical choice. But I loved the show. Loved Buck Owens. I thought he was great. So it's kind of like everything was like, at the time I was really getting into Rush and I was into Heart really big, stuff like that. But I was also like really wanting to learn how to play the guitar at this time. So I'm getting to be like a middle teenager now, probably 15, and I really want to know how to do this. And I had a guitar and was really trying to learn. But all these bands I liked, I couldn't possibly play like that. It's like it was not even possible. I was like, it was like I can't even play a G chord, and it's like I'm supposed to like know how to do this, and it was very discouraging. Or whatever, and so I was like, I didn't know if this guitar thing was going to work out, and then lo and behold, the savior was punk rock came to America.
Okay.
It was like, I was watching Don Kirshner's rock concert and saw the Ramones, and I was like, wait a minute, it's like, yeah, they might be strumming fast, but their hands aren't moving real fast around the neck, and it sounds like I could be able to learn that, and so. That kind of gave me some hope, and I felt like I could maybe learn how to do that. And so punk rock kind of like saved the day. And I still didn't have a good guitar. I just had an acoustic guitar, and was doing the best I could with it. And then it was it was 1978, I think. I got my first, good electric guitar, a Fender Stratocaster. Bought it out of the Trading Times. But at this time, I was wanting to be a bass player because the guitar was kind of like throwing me. I had an acoustic. It was hard to play. And I also was just, completely in love with Phil Lynott from Thin Lizzy. Okay?
Right.
So I thought, I'll get a bass like that. And then our local music store had a black Fender Precision bass just like his. It was $425, brand new. And I saved up and saved up and saved up, and I was going to go get that bass. And the day I was going to go get that bass, I looked in the Trading Times, and they had a Fender Stratocaster for $275. So then all of a sudden, I'm just if I go get that bass, I won't have an amp. But if I get this guitar, I could get an amp because I have enough money left over. So that's how I became a guitar player was just because of that, simply like that. And then,
did you pick it up pretty quick after you got your Strat?
I did, actually. It was so much easier to play than the acoustic guitar. And the amp I got was this monster. It was I went to the Roberts Music in Festus. They had 2 used amps for the amount of money I had. One was a little 50-watt Marshall combo amp with 2 12s, and it was the baby poop brown Tolex on it, which is a fantastic amp. But right next to it was this TV Musician, 210 watts, big as a refrigerator. And so I'm thinking I could get that little Marshall there, or I could get this big giant Peavey for the same money. So of course I got the big giant Peavey,
right?
Which had fuzz and distortion in it. So I got that home. I could turn the fuzz and the distortion up, and it was real easy to start to sound like rock and roll. So I always remember the first song I figured out with bar chords on that guitar through that amp was "Fool for the City" by Foghat.
Oh wow.
Yeah. So it was like magic when I figured that out. And so I would just sit in my bedroom and play that over and over and over again. And I'm sure my parents were going nuts, but it was the only thing I knew.
Right.
But then I started, figuring out how to move the bar chords, or figuring out the easier Cheap Trick songs like Southern Girls and stuff like that. And so, yeah, I did progress pretty quickly through that point. And so that would have taken me up till I probably would have been goofing around in that way with no real bands or anything till late 70s, something like that. And it wasn't long after that we got our first little band together.
Was that the Blues, or was this?
That was we had a little. It was me and Bob Parr had a little. We would make music in his room, just recording little goofy things. But it turned into the Blue Moons. It came out of that. And so that would have been the first band. And with my little rudimentary bar chords, we were actually able to do pretty much. We could do Get Off My Cloud and Do Why Diddy Diddy and stuff like that.
Did that get you some gigs around town?
It did. We actually played at Caveland. Caveland was open then. The skating rink in a cave. So yeah, we got some gigs there. We started playing at high schools and talent shows, and we played a gig in the Crystal City Park one time. So yeah, we got some little gigs, and then we actually finally got some gigs in St. Louis. It was we got a gig, and it was I'm trying to remember how we got this. No, I know how we got this. This came from Farmington, Missouri. We got a gig in Farmington with Charlie Langrer. Okay. And he was punk rock guy from St. Louis. And don't ask me how he got that gig, but we opened for him at that gig. And we became friends that night, and then he got us to open for him on Christmas night in St. Louis one time. That was our first gig into St. Louis, which we opened with another band on that bill was Joe Camel and the Caucasians, 3 bands. And then through that, Joe Camel got us a gig over in Belleville with a band called the Primitives.
Okay. All right.
Okay. So this is how that all hooked up.
So now all country fans need to perk up at that name.
Yeah. So it's so we go from little high school gigs to a gig with Charlie Langrer in Farmington, Missouri, to a gig with Charlie in St. Louis, and then Joe Camelville got us a gig with him and the Primitives at the Liederkranz in Millstadt, Illinois. Well, the Primitives were, of course, Jeff Tweedy, Jay Farrar, Jay's brother, and Mike on drums. Right. So that was the first time we met them. And we actually ended up doing quite a few of those Liederkranz gigs together. It was that. For some reason we hit it off, and we would always open for them, and that was it. And then both our bands broke up. It was like Blue Moons, our singer left. We lost track of those guys or whatever, you know. And then after our singer left, it was like we forged ahead. I became the singer. Bob Parr remained on bass. Mark was still playing drums. We got Bob's little brother, Tom, to play guitar. And then we changed the name of the band to Chicken Truck because what happened at this point, now it's 80s. And during the 80s is when MTV came around, hair metal came around. It was like all that. I hated everything that I was hearing. So that's when I switched to country. Okay, it was to get away from that stuff that I went and started listening to country music. And the first person I loved in country music was John Anderson.
Right.
And he had the song Swingin' at the time. But then I started buying his records, and on one of his records, he had a song called Chicken Truck. And so that's why we named our band after him, because we were going to be a country band. And so we named the band after the song he wrote. And once again, we're playing gigs in Festus, and we were trying to be really cool. You know, I was getting pretty good on guitar at this time. So we were, like, doing all the cool stuff, you know, because through John Anderson, I started working backwards, getting into Merle Haggard, Waylon Jennings, you know, it was an endless, bottomless pit of discovery.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And so we were trying to do all that stuff, but it's the 80s now, trying to play country gigs, and those people didn't want to hear any of that. You know, they wanted to hear what was ever the country hits at that time. And I remember the big one at that time was Dan Seals, I Wanna Bop With You, Baby, All Night. And we were like, we are not playing that song. That's horrible. We're not going to do it. So we were really unpopular down there. Like nobody. We would get gigs, but nobody would like us, and it was kind of a failure. I just happened to be looking at the St. Louis Post-Dispatch, and there was an article in the Post-Dispatch of, you know, they used to have like a little musical feature, you know, in the entertainment section of, like, you know, this is what's happening around town. And all of a sudden we see this band is going to be playing at Cicero's called Uncle Tupelo. Right. And we look, and it's the guys from the Primitives. We're like, hey, it's those guys. We got to go see those guys. And so we went up and saw them, and they pretty much blew us away. You know, it was kind of like we went up, and it was like, holy cow. It was like, man, we're doing like this country stuff, and look at the way they're doing it. It's like, this is so, and we were so frustrated. But meeting those guys, they wanted to, you know, of course, we got right back together, and they said, you know, we got a gig opening for them in St. Louis. And But we realized that our little thing wasn't going to fly with that, just decided that, okay, we're going to do what we're doing, but we're going to do it like really loud.
Well, so when Uncle Tupelo would have been playing, was it Cicero's where they were playing?
Yeah, pretty much Cicero's and occasionally off Broadway, and that was about the two places that would have bands, you know, like that.
So that would have been what, 88 maybe? What?
Yeah, probably 88. I'm thinking we were still playing country down there. So yeah, it had to be 88.
When all of that started to happen, you know, Chicken Truck got some good press for a little cassette that you guys put out. Why didn't Chicken Truck take off any more than it did?
Well, because Bob, our bass player, was he just would not travel. I mean, he did not want to do that in any way. He wanted to just play one gig a month at Cicero's, and we would make it into an event. You know, we would plan the whole month on how to make the show crazier than the time before. And then we'd do that, and as soon as that was over, we'd start scheming on how to make it crazier and crazier and crazier. And that's all he had a job. He was like studying to be a paramedic at that time, and it was like he was just not going to do it. He was not going on the road. So we were pretty much, you know, held to St. Louis. And then what happened during this time was Uncle Tupelo got their first record deal, okay, on Rockville Records. Right. Which that like really made me frustrated. You know, it's like, okay, these guys are going ahead and they're doing this, and Bob doesn't want to do this, and I sort of like put the ultimatum down. It's like, we have to do this, or there's no sense in keeping doing this. And so Bob just left. That's the end of that, you know, so what? But then being friends with the Uncle Tupelo guys, they were going on the road for the first time, and they just asked if I wanted to come along. So that's how I sort of fell into like being their extra guy. You know, it was just like I didn't have a band anymore. They were doing what I wanted to do. It's like they're going, and they asked me if I want to go, so I'll go. And at first I did it. I actually started actually doing a little work, and then I started getting a little pay for it. And, you know, I actually became like an actual kind of dude for them, you know, and that lasted from 90 till 93 is how long I did that with them.
Right. Now, in the meantime, you were asked to do the Indianapolis single, and how did that come about?
That came about through Jeff Packman, who was their guy at Rockville Records. You know, it's just because he had met me while I was out on the East Coast doing Uncle Tupelo stuff with them. And he just, you know, said, you know, I would love to do this. I remember we were sitting in some Indian restaurant in New York City. And he said, you know, I would love to make a 45, you know, if you want to do it. And I thought, sure, why not? So I got Mark to play drums. Mark was still in town at that time. And then I got Jay and Jeff to play on it. And we just made it for rock. That was kind of all there was to it. You know, it was just sort of like a little thing. Just he wanted to do it, and so we did it. It really didn't have much intention behind it, but that's how it happened.
But you already had a lot of the songs that would appear not only on the first album but on the second album as well. Yeah,
right. Yeah, they were all on. They were all Chicken Truck songs.
Right.
A lot of them were. Yeah. Yeah, because we did. You know, we wrote a lot of songs. So you know, I wrote some, Bob wrote some, or Tom Parr wrote some. We stockpiled a bunch of stuff that we actually used later.
Right. Now, when did you had an English teacher who was very influential, or I guess the other guys did. You just knew him, is that right?
Right. Exactly. He was their English teacher, Scott Taylor. And he actually was the first guy that encouraged the Blue Moon because he was Scott Summers, our singer. He was his teacher, and he was Mark's teacher. But at the first in the Blue Moons, Mark wasn't in it. Scott Taylor is the guy that hooked us up with Mark, actually, when the drummer we had left. And so yeah, Scott Taylor was all about, you know, you guys should write some songs. You know, you should do that. If you want to be a band, you should make up your own stuff. And we did. So yeah, he's been around kind of like since I first learned to play guitar and first started playing music with other guys. He just happened to be there, and I met him through the other guys because he was their school teacher. And the reason that he hooked up with Scott Summers and Bob Parr was they were in the hallway talking about the Ramones, okay? and because we all kind of discovered that stuff at the same time, and Scott Taylor had just come there from Troy, Illinois, and he was a big record geek, and we didn't know anybody like that. And he about fell out of his chair when he heard two kids from Festus, Missouri, talking about the Ramones. You know, so that's how that thing met up. And so yeah, Scott's been around since day one of the very first band, really.
Now, isn't it true that the newest record is the only one he hasn't written on? Is that right?
That's right. That's right. Very first one. He had no songs for us this time. Everybody slows down.
That's not a permanent thing, though. You hope you'll have some more Scott Taylor material in the future. Is that right?
Yep. Oh, yeah.
Well, so when you were out on the road with Uncle Tupelo, say from 90 to 93, what did you learn?
What did I learn? I learned how to go on the road. I learned everything there. How to do things inexpensively, you know. It was like how just basically everything. How to go from town to town. How to, you know, friggin' keep it up. Unfortunately, I also learned how to drink liquor really hard, which that came back to haunt me later. But yeah, it was basically the rules of the road, how to get from one place to place. You know, back in those days there were no cell phones. So yeah, I learned in the primitive days, the ancient days of touring.
Well, when they started to have some success, did you see? I mean, what happened there? Anyone that would have described their relationship in the early days would have talked about how loving and great things were. All of a sudden, kaput.
Well, you know what? I wasn't around in the what was reportedly the worst days, because what happened was I was with them up through '93, and my last gig with them was Ken Coomer's first gig with them.
Okay,
and it was at Mountain Stage in Charleston, West Virginia.
Okay,
and I played. It was when March 16th through 20th was out with them. I was actually playing with them at that time. And so Mike had left the band, and then they had Bill Belzer for a while.
Wasn't that what he was called?
Whorehouse Bill?
Yes.
Yeah. So they had Bill Belzer for a while, and then Bill was gone, and then Ken came. And so it was Ken. We all flew out there together. It was Ken's first gig and my last gig, because what happened was whenever I recorded the demo stuff with those guys.
Right.
It was like, just for fun, just the fun demos when they were recording their second album. And that's what Tony, their manager, Tony Margarita, he actually got me a record deal from those demos. I wasn't looking for one. I was, perfectly happy being their guy. I had no problems with that. I was getting paid. I was traveling. I was getting to play every night. And but he got me a record deal, and I had to throw a band back together, just to make this record. It was sort of a pain in the ass, because things were starting to get better for those guys.
Right.
It was like things were picking up. It was starting to ramp upwards. Things were getting easier. We were getting hotel rooms. It was like everything was like getting better. I was getting paid better. Things were looking good, but now I got this band thing to deal with. So, and that was coming up. And this gig I did with Ken was in January of '93. And then we were set to record our first album in March of '93. So basically I had to leave them when things started getting good and then go right back down to the bottom again. But I knew how to do it. It was like I just had all that training. So it was kind of exciting, It was like, okay, well, we'll do this on our own. Why not? It was like Mark joined right back up. He was like this joined instantly. Tom Parr sort of talked his way into the band again. It was like he got back in. And then Jeff Tweedy found us our bass player, Tom Ray. He found him in Chicago. He was playing with Toy Dog Pondering at that time. And we threw it together real fast and made the first album, and off we went.
Now, that first album, that is some really unusual material for that sort of album in terms of lyrically, especially. And I mean, it's great and it's perfect, and I like it as much as I love any of your albums. But that's some different subject material for a brand new band to be taken on. Looking back at it, don't you think that?
Probably. I never really thought about it. It was just sort of like I don't know. That whole record was made in a panic. It was like we hadn't even played a gig before we recorded that. It was like we had one booked, but it got snowed out that winter. So that was like our first function as a band was recording that album. And when we got down there, we didn't have a band name yet. We recorded it in Athens, Georgia, where Tupelo had just done March 16th through 20th, which was John Keene's studio. So that's why we used him, because I just worked with him, or just been around him, and so we went right back there, and but it all happened so fast. He did not even know that I was bringing a band. We got snowed out on the way down there. We had 5 days to record. 2 of them we were spent sleeping in the car when we got stuck in Superstorm 93 in the South. Okay, it was a massive ice storm hit the whole South, and so 2 of our 5 days got used up just being stuck like in Ringgold, Georgia. We finally got there on the third day, about 3:15 in the afternoon. We made it there. And we get there, and John Keene has the studio set up as if I'm going to do this, just me and an acoustic guitar and a banjo. He had no idea I was even coming with a band. So then, the rest of that afternoon was spent reconfiguring the studio. Tom Ray was like writing out the chord changes and setting them on a music stand so he could play playing it on the fly. We had to do everything so quick. We did all the music in one day, all the vocals the second day, and then we mixed it on the third day.
Kids, that's how it was done back in the day. Now, obviously, that was released at the beginning of '94. Is that correct?
I think that's right. That sounds about right. I don't remember if it came out in '93 or '94. I don't remember.
And when it came out, I mean, you started to draw some pretty good praise on that. I mean, it struck a chord.
Yeah, that was a little bit surprising. I wasn't really expecting. I didn't even know what I was expecting. I was still in the panic of just trying to get it together, and it was like, so that was a little surprise. Yeah, that was kind of like, oh wow, that's kind of nice. So that was cool.
The manager for Uncle Tupelo at that time, who you talked about getting you a record deal, was Tony Margarita. And
correct. Well, Tony was like my one of from the meeting him through the Uncle Tupelo guys. I love Tony. I would go to his house and just hang out. We would sit around and barbecue and drink beer and whatever. And so it was like, he was actually one of my better friends in those days. And he actually, managed us at the start. He was the first. He did the first album.
Yeah, but I was just. It seemed like you guys and Uncle Tupelo, Tony was able to kind of maneuver things to get you guys involved in a lot of projects. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, he was real good at that stuff. I was like, I don't know how, or I don't know. I don't even really know when he did it, but he did it, and he was just real good at that.
And then you went to New York City to make your next album.
Yep. Our first album was on Eastside Digital Records, as was the second. But the head guy of Eastside Digital was friends with Eric Ambel, okay? Right. And I knew Eric Ambel, I knew who his name was because I was like a big Morells fan back in the time. And the first time I ever saw him was in St. Louis to see the Morells. Like, they used to play there like once a month or something. We would go every time. And this one night we went, which I always remember the night, was the debut world premiere on KSHE of ZZ Top Eliminator. All right?
There you go.
So me and Scott Taylor sat in the car and waited till Eliminator was over to go into the Heartbreak Hotel to see the Morells. But they had a little sign up there. Actually, the guy told us at the door, the Morells had to cancel tonight, but we have another band we think you'll like. They're called the Del Lords, and it's $5. And if you don't like them, I'll give you your money back.
There you go.
Thought, I thought you can't beat that deal. So we saw the Del Lords and thought they were just fantastic. So I instantly found out who they, it's like that was, I might have just passingly said hello to Eric that night. But anyway, I always remembered who he was. He was the guy in the Del Lords. And Scott Taylor, researched and found out as much as he could because he was that guy in those days.
Right.
And then Eric came back with, it was the ultimate dream gig for me. He came back with Roscoe's Gang, which at that time was the Del Lords, the Morells.
Right.
So I saw them at Off-Broadway. And that was the first time I ever talked to Eric Ambel was at that show because I just thought they were stupendous. Long story short, when Steve Daly said Eric Ambel, he sent him our first album, and Eric was interested in working with us. And that was real exciting because that was the first famous guy I knew of that was interested in us.
Right.
So he came to our first show ever we played in New York, which was, another blizzard hit us, and hardly anybody came to the show, but he came. And he said, yeah, I'd love to do your second album, if you got, whatever, just like gung-ho for it. I was like, man, I know this guy. This guy is cool. This guy makes cool music. I didn't even know that he was the original guitarist for Joan Jett at this time, okay?
Right.
Didn't even know that yet. I was just totally knowing him from the Del Lords. So I was like, yeah, heck yeah, I would love to do that. So that's how we hooked up. It was through Steve Daly at Eastside Digital, and then Eric coming to the first gig, and so, yeah, it was time to make the second album. That's what we were going to do. That was very exciting because we were going to make it in New York City. We had never spent any extended time in New York City. I had been there with Uncle Tupelo, but it always just in and out, go in and then leave. this was going to be like 2 weeks in New York City with this famous guy. And it was like, whoa, you know, it was starting to feel like the big time or something.
Right. Well, it was about to be. Hope you enjoyed part 1 of my interview with Brian Henneman. Come back to find the second part of that interview and interviews with others, including Eric Amble, Tim Clifford, and pretty soon Alan Light and Warren Zanes. Man, we've got good people lined up. Visit me at dalewiley.com, buy some books, subscribe to the podcast, and throw money. Copyright 2016.